They said she wouldn't last a day. When the helicopter dropped her at the edge of the jungle, boots thudding into soft moss, she looked like someone's aunt who wandered into the wrong place. No tactical gear, no hardened expression, just a weathered pack, a faded jacket, and a quietness no one could place. The others smirked before she even spoke. Someone laughed that she'd cry by sunset. A few instructors didn't bother learning her name. She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't impressive. And when they slipped her into the solo recon list without radio or GPS, nobody protested. They expected her to fail. 19 days later, just after sunrise, she stepped out of the trees. Her face was streaked with mud, her pack torn at one side. Behind her came two elite officers leaning on her shoulders, barely conscious but breathing. The jungle had nearly swallowed them whole, but she brought them back. Quiet. Alone. No one saw her coming. And now no one could look away. Rachel Lee didn't grow up chasing trophies or loud applause. She was raised in a weather-beaten cabin nestled deep in the Appalachian woods where the wind whispered through pine trees, and survival was a quiet skill passed from one calloused hand to the next. Her grandmother taught her early how to listen not just to people, but to the forest, to the birds, to the silence between sounds. They didn't have much money, but they had knowledge that couldn't be bought. Rachel learned to track deer by broken twigs, to spot rain hours before it fell, and to brew fever remedies from bark and roots. Long before she knew the name of a compass, she could find north by how the moss grew on the trees. As she got older, her path never led to boardrooms or uniforms. She spent her 20s working with relief teams in places most people couldn't point to on a map. Honduras, Guatemala, flood zones, civil unrest. She treated bullet wounds by flashlight and carried children through mudslides with nothing but instinct and old training. No one took her photo. She never asked. Her life didn't fit neat titles. She wasn't a medic by certification, but when someone was hurt, she knew what to do. She wasn't a soldier, but she moved through danger with quiet precision. Rachel believed in action, not declarations, in helping without expectation. Most people never noticed her. She wore boots with cracked soles and a canvas pack stitched together with fishing line. Her jacket was her father's, patched and sun-faded sleeves rolled tight around lean forearms. Not because she couldn't afford better, but because every thread told a story she wasn't willing to trade in. She never cared for decorations or polished appearances. She brushed her hair back in a quick braid each morning and tied it with the same worn band her grandmother used to wear. She didn't wear jewelry. Her only real accessory was a pocket notebook, creased and water-stained, filled with field sketches and little survival notes. People mistook her quiet for fragility. They didn't see the thousands of hours spent studying terrain maps on borrowed computers. They didn't hear the way she counted footsteps when she walked tracked angles of sun through cloud gaps, memorized bird calls, not for beauty but for safety. She moved like someone with a plan even when there wasn't one yet. Rachel never asked to join the elite survival course in the jungle. Someone submitted her name quietly off record, maybe someone she'd once helped and forgotten. When the call came, she said yes, without asking what the challenge was. She didn't need to know the odds. She'd spent her whole life being underestimated. The truth was, Rachel didn't come to prove anything. She wasn't chasing redemption. She wasn't angry. She came because the jungle was honest. It didn't care about uniforms or reputations. It didn't flatter or lie. It just watched. And Rachel knew how to watch back. The jungle wrapped around the training camp like a trap waiting to spring. Thick vines hung from trees older than memory, and the air smelled like sweat sap and slow decay. Every breath felt heavy, like breathing through a wet cloth that never dried. This wasn't the kind of forest people hiked for fun. It buzzed with mosquitoes the size of quarters and spiders that shimmered in the canopy. Plants looked harmless until they burned your skin or left it numb for hours. The heat came in waves, pressing down on everything until even the elite operators lost their edges by midday. This was Sierra Crucible, the joint survival proving ground for some of the toughest special forces in the world. Navy SEALs, Israeli commandos, Katyusha Rangers, South American jungle units. Each participant had seen war, worn medals, and signed up to prove they were the best at staying alive when nature and man turned hostile. Reputation walked in with them, and none of them came to lose. Then Rachel arrived. No insignia, no tech gear, just faded green cargo pants, a weathered rucksack, and boots with cracked heels. She wore a wide-brimmed hat that had seen more sun than most of the rookies in camp, and when she stepped off the truck, she didn't try to impress anyone. She just adjusted her straps and looked at the tree line like it was an old friend. The reaction was instant. A few snorts. One soldier joked they must have started a civilian mentorship program. Another asked if she'd taken a wrong turn from the cook staff. Nobody asked her name. They didn't need to. Everything about her screamed outsider. The instructors barely glanced at her paperwork. One of them skimmed it, muttered something under his breath, then slapped a generic number tag onto her shoulder. No team assignment, no prep briefing. No one bothered to hide that they expected her to wash out early. Everyone else had multi-day ration kits, heat-mapped trail markers, and filtered hydration lines running from sleek tactical vests. Rachel had a battered canteen with a leather strap and a hand-tied pouch of what looked like dried roots clipped to her belt. She moved slowly, but not from weakness. It was the kind of movement that belonged to someone who didn't want to waste anything, especially breath. But no one saw that. They just saw the wrong clothes, the quiet stance, and the fact that she didn't brag or boast. In a camp built on power displays, she brought none. And in a place designed to break people down, they assumed she was already broken. It started small. Someone swapped her bug repellent with cooking oil, the label carefully peeled and re-glued. She didn't say anything, just noted the sweet, useless scent and set the bottle aside. Then her boots, already worn thin, tore clean through at the sole during drills. Later, she found the cuts were too clean to be accidental. Her socks were soaked in mud and her toes blistered, but she didn't complain. She stitched the damage with fishing line while others laughed over their hydration tablets and digital maps. One morning, her rations were gone. The pouch was there, but inside was nothing but crushed leaves. No one looked surprised. No one stepped up. When she reported it, the sergeant chuckled and said she must have packed poorly. It wasn't a mistake. It was a message. They left her name off the team list during the first navigation phase. No one explained why. An instructor handed her a folded paper with coordinates and pointed toward the tree line. She wasn't given a radio. No compass. Just a nod and a dismissive smirk. She was told it was part of the individual field assessment, but no one else had been sent out alone. Rachel didn't argue. She didn't ask for backup or raise her voice. She packed what was left of her gear, double-checked her knots, and filled her cracked canteen with water she filtered twice. Her fingers moved with the same steady rhythm her grandmother used when wrapping medicinal roots. Not rushed. Just ready. As she stood at the jungle edge, one of the soldiers leaned against a tree and said she'd probably be back by nightfall begging for evac. Someone else muttered they wouldn't even waste the drone fuel tracking her. The instructor said nothing. One of them gave her a long, measured look and turned away. She adjusted the straps of her rucksack and stepped forward. The jungle swallowed the sound of her footsteps. She didn't glance back. She knew exactly what this was. They didn't think she belonged. They wanted her gone. And so she went. Not to prove them wrong. Not to earn their respect. She walked into the trees because that's what she came to do. Survive. The jungle didn't welcome her. It pressed against her skin like damp cloth, clung to her sleeves, and hummed with life that never slept. Mosquitoes drilled into any exposed patch, and every step left her soaked in a mix of sweat and fog. She moved carefully, not out of fear, but with the attention of someone raised to notice things others miss. On the first morning, she tied strips of cloth between low-hanging banana leaves and placed them above her pot to collect dew. By noon, she had half a cup of clean water. That night, she rubbed a mix of charcoal ash and crushed mint across her arms, remembering how her grandmother once said that even fire has a second life. Rachel slept under a lean-to built from palm fronds and branches bent into shape with vines. It wasn't pretty, but it held through the night's first storm. Her clothes stayed wet no matter how she moved, and her skin began to itch from bites she couldn't reach. Still, her hands stayed steady. She watched the sky change color through the tree gaps and made notes in her mind. She tracked a red-throated parrot for hours because it always circled before drinking. Its flight path led her to a muddy stream that didn't look like much, but she filtered it through cloth and boiled it twice. The water tasted like rust and bark, but it kept her upright. Every step deeper into the jungle felt less like a challenge and more like returning to something forgotten. When hunger came, it hit sharp and mean. She used a bent twig and part of her shoelace to make a snare, then waited motionless by a root hollow until a rodent tripped the loop. It wasn't much meat, but she cooked it over a flame built from dried moss and resin. She ate slow, letting her body adjust. Waste nothing. That rule was older than she was. She read the forest like a language. Ant trails told her where the rotting fruit fell. The way leaves curled on the ground told her where the night mist pooled deepest. She used crushed bark to mask her scent and layered moss beneath her tarp to keep the damp from stealing body heat. Every movement had purpose. Every hour was measured. Rachel didn't panic. She didn't question why she was there or wonder how long it would take. Her focus wasn't on escape. It was on rhythm. Breathe. Move. Listen. Her grandmother once said that surviving isn't about being faster or stronger. It's about knowing the signs before they matter. And Rachel knew them all. She found him slumped against a tree, one leg stretched out, the other curled unnaturally beneath him. His face was pale lips, cracked eyes half closed and glassy. A thin trail of blood ran from a swollen puncture just above his ankle. Rachel crouched without a word, her fingers brushing the skin near the bite. It was hot and tight, already darkening. She checked his pulse, slow but steady, then pulled out the small tin of boiled water she'd saved for emergencies. She tore a strip from the inner lining of her sock, strained the water through it, and rinsed the wound. He winced, but didn't open his eyes. She crushed a patch of fern she had collected earlier, mixing it with saliva into a rough paste, then packed it firmly over the bite. He murmured something under his breath, barely a whisper. She didn't answer. She took a strong branch from nearby, snapped off its sides, and began lashing together a stretcher with vine and cloth from her pack. Moving him wasn't easy. He groaned once, tried to lift himself, but his strength failed. She slipped her shoulder under his arm and dragged him onto the frame inch by inch until his weight rested evenly. Rachel found a shaded spot beneath a cluster of palms, higher ground, drier soil. There she settled him in and checked his breathing again. She pressed her palm to his forehead. Still too warm, but better than before. She gathered more water, laid leaves over the makeshift shelter to keep the bugs off, and sat beside him. She didn't speak, didn't explain, didn't bring up the things he once said. Her silence wasn't cold. It was focused. When he opened his eyes hours later, he saw her face first. She held out a small tin lid with sips of water and waited. He drank slowly, too weak to sit up, but his eyes tracked her movements now. He didn't ask why she helped him. She didn't offer a reason. She just wiped the sweat from his brow with the same cloth she'd used on herself the night before. Calm, efficient, steady. That night, as the jungle sounds rose and fell, she sat awake listening to the rhythm of his breathing. The same man who once laughed at her now lived because she refused to leave him behind. And even then she didn't need him to say a word. They found him near a shallow bend in the stream, face down, one arm stretched into the mud, like he had crawled the last few feet. His uniform was soaked and stained, his skin pale beneath streaks of sweat and grit. Rachel turned him gently, her eyes going straight to the bandage wrapped tight around his arm. The cloth was dark and smelled sour. When she peeled it back, the wound pulsed with heat. The flesh was swollen red and rimmed with streaks that climbed up to his shoulder. She didn't flinch. This wasn't new to her. Captain Min stepped back unsure, but Rachel was already unpacking what little she had left. She crushed bark between two rocks until it flaked into dust, then added ginger root she had dug up earlier and mashed them into paste. She worked fast with focus, her hands steady, as if she'd done this 100 times. She dabbed the mixture along the open wound, careful not to press too deep. The man's stirred eyes fluttering but not fully waking. She laid cool cloth soaked in boiled stream water over his forearm, layering it with large leaves to seal in the damp. The swelling didn't ease right away, but his breathing steadied. Rachel didn't speak while she worked. There was no point in asking questions when the answers wouldn't help. She pressed the wrap in place, secured it with strips of her own shirt, and moved to shade his body from the afternoon heat. By evening he was sweating again, this time from fever breaking, rather than rising. Rachel sat close, counting breaths, her fingers lightly resting on his wrist. His pulse had returned faint but consistent. She ground more bark for the night, her hands blackened and sore, but she didn't stop. Captain Min watched now without speaking. not from doubt, but from something quieter. Respect. He didn't ask what she was doing. He simply brought more leaves, more water without needing to be told. As the fireflies blinked between the ferns and the jungle sounds softened for the night, Rachel leaned back against her pack. Her work wasn't finished, but the crisis had passed. She didn't smile. She didn't relax. She just closed her eyes for a moment and breathed like someone used to holding the line until others could stand again. They followed her now, not because she told them to, but because it felt natural. Rachel didn't speak unless she had to, and when she did, her words came slow and sure, like someone who thought before every sound. She split their food into even portions without hesitation, handing the best cuts to the men without explanation. When it rained, she adjusted their shelter using nothing but palm fronds and instinct. She taught them how to pack coals in wet moss to keep them alive overnight, and how to use smoke without revealing their location. At dusk, she showed them how to stack damp wood under green leaves to send a low, steady trail of smoke into the canopy. Not enough to be spotted by search drones, just enough to let someone somewhere know they weren't gone. Captain Min didn't question her anymore. The Israeli major watched her hands as closely as he once read maps. Rachel didn't bark commands or demand status. She moved first quietly, and they mirrored her without needing a reason. She motioned with her chin, and they followed. She paused by a tree ears tilted slightly, and they froze without needing to ask why. Every step, every rest, every decision came from her rhythm. They began to sink to it without thinking. Her calm wasn't comforting. It was anchoring. In a place that tried to disorient them at every turn, Rachel became the one thing that held. When one of them started to falter, she handed over water before he asked. When they forgot which plant to avoid, she guided their feet around it with a look. They trusted her, not because she demanded it, but because she earned it with every silent act. At night, she sat closest to the fire and faced the dark. Her back never fully rested, her ears always listening. The others slept more soundly because of it. No rank, no medal, just the kind of steady presence that didn't have to say much to be known. By then, they stopped seeing her as the quiet one or the odd one. She wasn't background anymore. She was the map, the fire, the one who would not fall. Every choice they made started with her eyes. And that was enough. They saw her before they heard her. Rachel stepped out of the jungle just as the sun broke through the morning fog. Her boots cracked open at the soles, her sleeves damp and stained. Her eyes stayed forward, locked on the dirt path ahead, while the two men behind her leaned into their makeshift crutches, one with a bandaged arm, the other limping heavily. Camp froze. Conversations died mid-sentence. A mechanic dropped a wrench and didn't pick it up. The instructors by the gate stiffened, waiting for someone else to speak first. No one did. Rachel didn't pause. She walked straight across the clearing, head-level posture, upright. Her bag sagged against her spine, one strap barely holding. No ceremony, no drama. Just movement. Captain Min followed, his face pale but focused. The Israeli major trailed a few steps behind, slower but steady. They didn't need help. They just needed her pace. A junior officer ran toward them, eyes wide, unsure of what to ask. Rachel handed over a folded slip of paper. Coordinates, notes, 3 names. He scanned it, blinked, then turned and sprinted to the command tent. The rest of the camp still hadn't moved. Soldiers who once joked now stared without speaking. Someone whispered her name, but no one said it twice. She wasn't a rumor anymore. She was real. Inside the tent, the colonel read the report twice. He frowned, then checked the satellite logs. Her path matched perfectly. No beacon, no supply drops, no external signal received. She had survived 19 days in the deepest quadrant of the jungle and brought back 2 men who had disappeared. By noon, instructors were called into a briefing. Rachel sat outside on an overturned crate, her back to the door. She sipped water slowly, eyes half closed, while someone brought the injured men to the infirmary. Neither of them let go of their reports. The colonel stepped out an hour later. The same man who had once marked her as a statistical dropout now watched her like he was seeing something dangerous and rare. He told her quietly that her survival score was the highest on record. Not in her group, in program history. Then he looked around the camp and said something no one expected. Anyone found guilty of sabotaging gear or altering assignments would be required to submit written apologies. Formal, Signed. Reviewed. His tone didn't ask for questions. By sunset, the mood in camp had shifted. She still didn't speak much, but people moved out of her path without thinking. The instructors nodded when she passed. Soldiers who had once pointed at her boots now tied their own tighter. She didn't wear a badge. She didn't accept a medal. When asked what she wanted, she said she would stay one more cycle, long enough to help train the new recruits, especially the women. That night in the flicker of campfire light, no one joked. No one bragged. They just listened when she spoke. And when she sat quietly, they listened even more. The jungle hadn't changed her. It had shown everyone else who she had been all along. They offered her a medal, a formal commendation, a ceremony in front of the entire camp. Rachel listened politely, then shook her head. She didn't need a certificate to know what she'd done. The jungle had already given her more than enough proof. Instead, she asked to stay a little longer. Just one more training cycle, long enough to help the new group of recruits find their footing, especially the women, the quiet ones, the ones no one took seriously. She didn't teach through speeches or drills. She showed them how to read wind patterns by the underside of leaves, how to boil water with hot stones when fuel ran out, how to measure distance by the sound of distant birds. They watched her hands more than her mouth. She didn't command attention. She invited it. At night, while the others slept, she sat by the fire with a small, battered notebook in her lap. Each page filled slowly, not with quotes or mottos, but with instructions drawn from memory. Little diagrams, notes on which bark healed burns and how long smoke lingers on a wet morning. She tore the edges smooth and bound the pages with cloth from her old sleeve. Before she left, she gave it to a young recruit who reminded her of herself. The girl barely spoke, but her eyes never missed a thing. Rachel placed the notebook in her hands and said nothing. The girl nodded once, like she understood. That notebook didn't stay with one person for long. It moved from bag to bag, handed off quietly between shifts and tucked beneath sleeping mats. No one ever copied it. They just read and remembered. Field tips passed down like an old song, always by word of mouth, always with reverence. Rachel packed light on her last day. Same bag, same jacket. Her boots, still cracked, were patched once more with vine twine and stubborn care. She didn't say goodbye. She left before dawn, walking through the fog as the trees parted for her like they'd been waiting. Some said she headed south. Others said she joined a research group in Peru or followed a river deep into the Amazon. No one ever confirmed it. She just wasn't there anymore. But her presence lingered, in the way new recruits crouched lower when tracking or set traps with smoother knots, in the way instructors paused before writing someone off too quickly, in the way silence started to feel like strength instead of weakness. Years later, when someone mentioned her name, they didn't speak loudly. They lowered their voices a little, like remembering something sacred. She hadn't left a statue or a motto on the wall, just a trail of quiet knowledge and the kind of respect no ceremony could manufacture. And deep in the green silence where roots twist and light filters slow, her legacy still walks, soft-footed, unseen, steady.